Hello, good afternoon. Good afternoon, everyone. We have a panel member who will join us later, hopefully. It's really a pleasure and an honor to moderate this panel on cybersecurity, and I would like to congratulate ICRIER on the launch of the report, which I guess happened already. And I would also like to thank them for associating the World Bank to this annual event, and I hope we'll have many more opportunities to work with you. We have a very, very impressive panel, as we've heard in the introduction. I will not need to introduce them again, but really just to say that you know, the kind of knowledge on cybersecurity that we have on this panel here is very impressive, with panel members coming from both academia, the private sector, and government. So before turning to them with the most difficult question, let me do the easiest part, which is simply to remind all of us that we are in a world that is driven a lot by digital tools. You know, there used to be a time when if you wanted to move to point A to point B, you will drive on physical support roads or water or the air. You know, you could see them. Now we move from point A to point B without being able to touch the infrastructure or the means that allows us to move. We do indeed move. We tend to think that we're moving data and information when we use the digital infrastructure, but in fact, we're moving ourselves, we're moving our lives, we're moving our belongings, we're moving our monies, we're moving our identity. And when we do that, we expose ourselves to the risks of traveling, of this journey. If we capture, somebody capture our data, they capture our lives. And in India, the risks are great, not simply because India is more vulnerable, but simply because there are a lot of users of digital means in India. I understand 800 million people use digital means every day to communicate and share data. This is good because it creates jobs, it creates businesses, it creates growth. It's inclusive because you don't need a lot of money to use a cell phone to do transactions. India has taught us actually that India's TAC, for example, is one of the most inclusive development that the world has known. It has allowed many people to have access to a bank account, including women in rural areas. So all this is good. What is important to be reminded in this panel is that it comes with some risks. And I understand, for example, that in Asia Pacific region, the cyber attacks account for 31% of all reported incidents. So it's good. 1/3 of our risks is actually in the digital space. So how do we ensure that we can use digital means, internet, and increasingly AI to do all these transactions that we need to do whilst being safe? It's also important to remember that some segment of the populations, of the demographics, are even more vulnerable than the median user of the internet. Women, the youth, the elderly, some of them are using the internet for the first time. And so they're vulnerable. And the disabled, how do we ensure that they can trust the internet and use the internet for their well-being and for contributing to growth? So we hear to hear from the eminent experts on that. So with this brief introduction, I would like to turn to them, as I said, for the toughest questions. And if time permits, we will come to you, the audience, for questions that you'll want to ask the panel members. So first, I would like to turn to Payal and to ask you, you know, your research and your work has studied how women engage in the digital economy. Can you tell us about emerging trends in online safety for women in particular?
Thank you. Yeah, thank you for the question. And so indeed, in the last few years, I set up this organization called FemLab with my co-founder, Usha Raman. And I would say we've spoken to more than hundreds of women across India in different sectors, but also many different stakeholders like technology companies. In fact, I've been consulting with some of the big tech for years, and they seem more concerned about security and safety, but particularly in one dimension, which is on the gender dimension. So if we want to think about security and safety, why is the big tech so worried about women, right? And that's because that's half the user base. And in fact, one of the big multinational tech companies was worried about the plus 35 age group of women in rural and tier 2, tier 3 towns, because they consider that the internet was not for them. I'm not talking about an app or one sort of platform. We're talking about the entire internet because they saw themselves as senior citizens, right? Now, that kind of perception falls through the cracks in data collection because that doesn't fit under the elderly demographic by the UN and other sort of entities, right? So this is just to go to say that in order to address the sort of safety security issue, we need to recognize it's substantively a gender issue. And it goes down to looking at something very mundane like public spaces, right? So if we look at the public space, the physical public space, and the relationship of women with public space, it brings to a story to mind, like where in the UK sometime recently, a woman went missing in the broad daylight and it created all this panic. And a mayor then said, for the safety of women, he recommended women to stay inside after, 9 o'clock in the evening. Now, imagine if you were to flip it and said, you know what, given that the perpetrators are mainly male, what if after 9 o'clock, no men can leave their house and women can just roam free, right? I mean, how about flipping the script? So, analogously, right, we need to recognize that the digital space is a sort of public space, and we need to have that sort of rethink of the mentality of like, oh, locked profiles, because it's not just an altruistic issue. There's a last dimension is that it is a common sense issue because it is for the economy. And let me end with a few hard statistics, and we can continue with this, is that here's some hardcore things. If you don't recognize that women need to be safe and secure online, we're going to be missing them in data collection, but also in them participating in the digital economy. And this is a global trend. So get these statistics. 85% of global consumer spending are driven by women. It's $31 trillion. 77% of the influencers monetizing their social media content are women. The creator economy is driven by women in the rest of the world, right? We're talking about 60% of the creative are women. And last is that 90% of jobs are in some way going to be digitized in the future. So what's happening in India? We don't know because we're not looking there, because we underestimate the role that women have to play, and they have a glass ceiling, and that glass ceiling online is security and safety, which means that they cannot capitalize on the attention economy, right? And we can continue more on that.
Thanks, Vayal. So let's pick it up where you left on India. What is happening in India, and I'd like to turn to Narendra and ask you, can you give us an overview of the state of cybersecurity in India? In your current position, I'm sure you've been looking at it very carefully. Yes. You need a mic. Oh, sorry. I think.
Yeah, thanks. Oh. Okay, thanks. It's a journey. Cybersecurity is a journey. Having said that, are we somewhere behind with the rest of the world? I wouldn't say so. Are we, compared to 2 years back, are we somewhere ahead? I would say yes. So no, it's a learning experience. And one thing about cybersecurity is it's not that one size fits all. You take a country of size of India and the different sectors which are there, the maturity level is not the same across all sectors. So if you look at the financial sector and then you look at any other sector, the power sector, you will find that the maturity level of the two different sectors is different altogether. So that way, would I say that all sectors are secure to the same extent? You would not say the same. So, and this is because of historical reasons. For example, in the banking and financial sector, they have been driven by technology for a very long time now. And then in-house, there's a lot of expertise that has developed. There are a lot of digital systems that have been deployed long ago. And over a period of time, there's a learning that's happened because of breaches and all of that, that this technology has matured and competent people have been deployed in that. Similar the case with the telecom sector also, you'll find that there's a good amount of expertise that is available in the sector, and they're able to manage it well. So if you take the power sector, for example, you take around a couple of years back, it wasn't the case that they were very robust, but we had certain incidents that had happened, and then general awakening has happened in that sector, right from the top to the bottom. And it's become a top-driven approach that's taking place there, where you find that right from the ministry level, there's a drive to see that cybersecurity practices are made more robust there. So as late as around a year and a half, you'll find some of the bigger, like, Power Grid and all of that. They've established security operating centers, but they didn't have formal security operating centers operating before. Well, you would say that any big enterprise having a security operating center is a dice cannon. It should be there, but they didn't have it. So that way, I would say that if you look at the cybersecurity posture of the country, you would not say that it's a, what do you say, the common denominator which is there, and say that it's across all the sectors, it's the same. It's varies across all the sectors, and there's a lot of work that's to be done among the different sectors. So that is what I would say. And the skill sets of the people who are there, the technology that deployed there, they're also different. But there's an awakening that's happened. And in that regard, for example, from our office, we have driven for taking a whole of nation holistic approach, for coming up with a cybersecurity strategy. The earlier cybersecurity policy of the Minister of Electronics and Information Technology was of 2013. So the Reed felt, and that was a good policy in the sense that it, delineated the different dimensions of cybersecurity, right from having incident response, sectoral certs, capacity building, reporting of incidents. So you'll find that R&D, so all of the different aspects of cybersecurity were delineated in that, and we had an idea of what are the dimensions of cybersecurity. But it didn't really have the targets and all. So then we started working on the holistic approach with interaction with the industry, all the stakeholders, and worked on the cybersecurity document, strategy document that is there. And that's a whole of nation approach, and taking a holistic approach and all that. So that's, and where are we with respect to the rest of the world? And you'll find across the world also, this is the status of the technological deployment and the manpower capabilities that are there in across the world also. So we are at par with the rest of the world.
Thank you, Narendra. So let me turn to Vinayak with a fairly similar question. From where you sit, how will you assess the landscape of cybersecurity in India? Where we are, what are you hearing from the stakeholders, and any progress over the past several years, and any path that you see for going forward?
Yeah, thank you for that question. So if we look at the architecturally, right, national level architecture for cybersecurity, so we made those significant investment in last 10 years of time with the national cybersecurity policy outlined in 2013 to the kind of institutions, the institutional mechanism we have for one is to take care of the critical sector security, and other is to take care of the computer emergency response team, and also the coordination function at a national level. There is an ITU index which tracks the country's preparedness for cybersecurity. Some years back, India was standing around 44, and now it is 10th in the first 10th nation, basically. So that that tells us the progress that country had achieved from the national architecture perspective for the cybersecurity. One is that. Second part is the, as you rightly talked about, the digitization, the pace at which the digitization happening in the country, and the kind of footprint that we see the end citizens are exposing their footprint to digital mean, and the kind of possibilities with respect to the fraud that we see in the country. Although percentage-wise, if you look at other countries, if you look at percentage, that is not quite a significant percentage. But the sheer number, because of the number of transactions that we have been doing in years' time, the sheer number is significantly higher, and now there seems to be some challenge at a level of the frauds that are impacting the end user, basically, especially the financial fraud. And for that, I think there are a lot of architectural effort that is being put together. There's a national cyber crime center, right? There is a I4C in India. Crime Prevention Coordination Center, which is under Ministry of Home Affairs. So this is not only the initiative, it's the architecture basically. So almost 250 plus institutions has been connected to that initiative. And suppose you come across any fraud and then you register that or report that fraud, so automatically the things are sent to the financial institutions and the money can be blocked for 48 hours kind of time basically. And there are a lot of, I know this is still early age, so now we are almost 3 million cases which got registered on that platform. And that gives quite a good insight to us what kind of cases, what kind of modus operandi that is being practiced here. And that also tells us that architecturally, there are so many more things needs to be done basically. Because the transaction processing is so disaggregated and at a different level, the things of the modus operandi can be found basically. So how nationally you really converge architecturally basically and start to provide that critical victim support is very important. Another last point which I would like to conclude is the way the system that you set up, the end user, if you look at sometimes the decision making, if end user is made responsible to make a decision for security. But for example, in Indian ecosystem, most of the transaction we have to take a OTP and put that OTP in the transaction basically. It's like making that individual responsible to take a security decision basically. And that is creating a lot of challenges in this country because that is leading to a lot of social engineering attack. And now we had been advocating from Data Security Council of India to remove the cognitive burden on the user on cybersecurity. If you remove the cognitive burden on the user on cybersecurity or privacy, then you make systems more responsible for the security. And if there is no role of me to put OTP there, there will be not much of the effort to get hold of that OTP basically. So how do we make system more in a way that it is not putting a lot of cognitive burden to end user is something that a lot of effort is required, and RBI is now actually talking about those efforts basically. RBI is moving from authentication, which is OTP based, to not OTP based kind of authentication ecosystem.
Thank you. I see we have Napinai online. I'll come to you if you can hear us, and thanks for the effort of joining online. I understand you are in court. I'm sure you're dealing with one of these cybersecurity cases. But I wanted to come back on the issue of OTP and ask you if you can comment a bit on that, because one thing I like about the OTP is that, you know, I never thought of it really as a security issue. I thought of it as a right to have access to my information. So if you remove the OTP for security concerns, and I'm pretty sure you will increase security by removing the OTP, but then you also take away something. You take the right of the user to give banks or others access to the data, and that could turn out to become a security issue, or at least a trust issue. So any thought on that?
Yeah, so but see, OTP is whose? Means bank sends me OTP and I take it and I enter in my system, right? Yes. So there are other ways of getting you owner of your data basically, right? And there are a lot of architectural interventions like a entire blockchain ecosystem that people talk about, where you can really make you owner of a data rather than you kind of onboarding to the bank, you can onboard banks to work with you basically. In that case, there are different ways to make you as a owner of a data basically. OTP in Indian ecosystem, what is happening, it is leading to a lot of those social engineering attack, a lot of phishing attack. There are a lot of centers all across which are just calling you to get hold of the OTP.
Yeah. So, okay, great. We'll have a conversation about it. I think part of what we want to discuss here is security, safety, and also trust, right? Because security and safety help trust. So if you focus a lot on security, but you reduce trust, then I'm not sure where we'll get, but maybe we'll have a
Sure.
tight conversation on
Yeah.
that. Let me come to Napinai. Napinai, thanks for joining again. Drawing on your on ground experience with cybersati, can you share some thought on the resolution of cyber crimes in India, especially when it comes to the online safety of children, women, persons with disabilities, and older people?
Thank you for having me here, and I really miss being there in person. I would have definitely liked to be there in person. Having said that, very, very quickly, if I were to talk about the role of law or courts in terms of ensuring or assuring online safety, I would say that in a way, India has actually led from the front. And I know your question was with respect to cybersati, and I'm really grateful for that. I'm going to come to that later. I want to first finish on the issue about courts and how they have been contributing to online safety. And in a way that also builds into the three issues that you talked about: security, safety, and trust. And the last part of it, in a way, is what I felt that the Supreme Court's order ensured. So we had a suo motu case before the Supreme Court, which we briefly call as Prajwala versus Union of India. And I was amicus in that matter, not as cybersati, but as a lawyer, practicing lawyer. And the court had to deal with the two issues which we are talking about today, which is online safety of women and children. So it dealt with the uploading of violent imagery of women online and also of CSAM or child sexual abuse material. So a government committee was formed, and through a consensus mechanism, a lot of issues evolved in terms of making or attempting to make the online space a safer space. The first and foremost, and I actually tie into what Payal said earlier about why would big tech invest in safety of the user, especially for women and children. So one of the issues that came up in terms of the conversations and the outcome, I'm not talking about what we discussed at the committee, but the outcome of the committee meetings, and that is captured as an order of the Supreme Court in October 2017. As far back as that. The issues that came up were invariably a user looks for protection and prevention of crimes against the user. That is the trust factor that decides which is the platform a user will adapt to most. Why do we choose one of the platforms, and even where we have an issue with respect to privacy, we are very reluctant to move? And I'm referring here to a chat app which all of us use, right? It's because you have already become used to a particular platform and you want continuity there, and therefore you also want safety there, and you expect the technology platform to provide you that safety. Trust factor here I'm talking about in a slightly different perspective, to say that where prevention and protection is provided, that is where users are also most comfortable and will adapt to easily. So one of the things that comes out of this Supreme Court hearing and exercise through the committee were to provide easily accessible and easily, remedies that can be easily availed of by users to protect and prevent content such as violent imagery or content which violates their privacy rights from being circulated online, and for speedy removal of such content. We achieved that through a simple process of just making a provision specifically, for instance, for CSAT. You don't have it with such specificity for women, but you do have a separate button of reporting now because of this case for nudity enabled violent videos or imagery against women. Not nudity per se, but something much more specific. So when we talk about safety and security of women and children online, the first level of threshold we would expect is that the user will be kept safe from violence against them. The second level is if violence is used against them, then they will have protective measures within the platform and will not be constrained to move police or courts for protection. And the third level is that law will provide remedies if a user wants to approach a court or police. And the fourth and the most important is that those remedies will be effective. Now, this case actually dealt with all of these four issues. And this is where it ties into what I've been doing through my non-profit called Cyber Sati Foundation. And where Cyber Sati, for those of you who may not be familiar with the language, it stands for Cyber Friend. The construct was that any person who is in trouble will first reach out to a friend and not to family or authority figures. And when that reach out happens, the friend has to be better equipped to be able to advise properly instead of misleading the victim. And therefore, the first responder needs to know what the law of the land is, what the rights of the victims are, and how best they can move forward. And not advise them to say, oh, the system will not work for you, just keep quiet and stay at home. That will not do. I'm totally with Payal when she was talking about that. I think that's a statement that all of us, in fact, have used at some point of time or the other by saying, don't preach to the victim, right? So this is where Cyber Sati has been focusing on to say, one, of course, our flagship initiative was to ensure that users will be made aware of the threats and vulnerabilities online, and they will also be provided with information about what are the preventive and protective measures. Where are the telltales? How can you protect yourself as a preventive measure by using the technology responsibly? You be a responsible user and you demand and command responsible technology also from platforms. And the third level is to make them aware, and this is something which I would earnestly urge governments to also follow. We are having some immense initiatives from the government in terms of ensuring awareness. A lot of it is a direct outcome of this case of Prajwala. But having said that, we are still talking to the victim. We need to also send messages, strong messages out to the criminals to explain to them that they are traceable, they can be prosecuted and punished. It's really critical for that, for law to act as a deterrent. And I personally feel that unless the system shows itself to be effective, the deterrent aspect of law is unfortunately lost. So that part of highlighting what the remedies are in law for victims is something that Cyber Sati has been doing. And most critically, I was very intrigued. I have done a lot of work, particularly with children, in terms of ensuring awareness amongst them. And the one thing that stood out is we all tend to forget that invariably a lot of crimes are committed by children, not just against children. So it's really important to highlight where the thin line of delineation is, where you cross it from, let's say, a prank to a crime. Something that starts off as a joke but lands as a crime. What is a challenge and what is a crime? What are the do's and what you're going to get punished for? And this is a criticality which is something that Cyber Sati has addressed too. But having said all this, both as a practitioner and as a Cyber Sati, and I always say each one of us who's working towards the protection of the weaker sections, not just women and children, I speak for a non-binary gender too here. In terms of any kind of protection online, I call them a Cyber Sati. So with that, I would like to say that Cyber Sati, as a Cyber Sati or as a practitioner, what I have seen is, I've seen a huge improvement in terms of enforcement against cyber crimes now. I see an increase. We talked about trust. And I wanted to close out on the aspect of the need for trust in law enforcement, in systems. And I see that improving. And I hope that this will work as a better deterrent going forward.
Sorry, Nabna, we lost you because of some technical issues here. If we have a chance, we'll come back to you for concluding remarks on the last question. Okay. Can we resume? Yeah, okay, thanks. So we'll come back to you. Thank you very much. And you know, I like the point you made about you know, cybersecurity being we are all, you know, we see ourselves as victims. We tend to think about the victim, but we sometimes forget that it's also, you know, there are authors, the people who are responsible for the cybersecurity attack or whatever it is, and it's challenging because sometimes you have some of the most vulnerable members of our society who are also kind of authors of cybersecurity, you know, especially the youth, as you mentioned. So it creates a big challenge. So I would like to put the same question to the four panel members, and I will appreciate your thoughts from your standpoint on the issue of first awareness about cybersecurity, and what is needed for a whole of government or a whole of society approach to it. So first part, your thought on whether you think there is enough awareness of cybersecurity. You know, cybersecurity, for example, I'm sure they may have data on whether they have more people reaching out to them. What is the data telling you? What is your own experience telling you about awareness about cybersecurity, in particular in India? And what do you think it will take for society to address that as a whole of government or a whole of society? Maybe I'll start with, you know, I was going to start, Payal, I see you have your mic ready, but maybe we'll start with you. Yeah, why don't we do that? Yes.
Yeah, so, you know, there's a lot of public, I mean, whenever we talk about it from a user end, we tend to focus on typical public literacy campaigns, yada, yada, you know, the usual. I'd like to speak a little differently and focus on the back end. For example, training data sets, and this ties to the previous panel, is training data sets, like educating that data set so as to foster a safer, more trusted AI environment, right? Because that's also literacy. And in a sense, it's also a co-literacy, because when we are, you know, like the prompt literacies is emerging new ways of also understanding our own biases. So currently, I'm on the UN committee to come up with the first report on regulation guidelines on synthetic data, which is happening it'll be out in the next 2 months. And this notion of how do we protect and keep, you know, train these data sets in a way which reflects our contemporary values for safety, security, overall digital well-being. And it sounds like a pretty straightforward answer, but I'll share some of the struggles we've had. For example, in the global South context, including that of obviously India, is how do you identify what is considered a problematic content? Like sex, it is actually sexual content. Okay, sexual content is, you know, one of the most contentious issues in terms of security and safety for children and for cross-board, right? And so there's a thin line between sexuality as a means to exploration, which is extraordinarily much needed because the global South is made up of majority of young people. 90% of young people in the world today live in there. And the way of self-actualization is very much through their everyday forms of sexuality. So most of the global South countries have extraordinarily stringent laws on anything to do with sex content. So there's no venues for young people to talk about sex or engage with sex. So you have a regular sexual content versus unconsented sexual material. And it's extraordinarily difficult to identify and to block. So what happens is there's a hammer to deal with everything and is basically all blocked, which means it fosters even more of a need to go to platforms or the underground in ways where we don't get to track it and trace it. And another example actually would be interesting, and it's a more hopeful one, is because of the enormous amounts of protests happening worldwide. Because if we look at the geopolitics today, majority of countries are non-liberal democracies, right? So they factor in a variety of different forms of governance, and protest is not typically allowed in its own ways. Like look at the Iranian case. And we're working, FemLab, my organization, is working with activists across different parts of the world. And it's interesting to see these women Iranian groups that are using synthetic images without the hijab, of these women wearing whatever they want and kissing and sharing these memes, but of not real people, but it's provocative enough. And because of the surveillance state that actually is able to do facial recognition and is able to then, confine those people, for infinite amounts of time, this is an extraordinarily powerful instrument for activists to actually communicate the message without actually targeting individual people, right? So, and there are a number of examples, but it is well worth keeping in mind that when we talk about literacy and awareness, we have to do it on the back end too, which is building a digital culture through the training of data sets and confronting some of the most formidable issues we have today, which again, more research is needed. So let's increase that R&D budget. All right.
Thanks, Bayal. I think we'll remember you as the panel member who raises some of the toughest, thorniest issues. First you talked about, solution to cybersecurity that hurt women by isolating them even more. And now you're raising the issue of cybersecurity solution that could actually be worse than the alternative. It reminds us that this is not a simple issue. It's you could actually, cyber security can be a double sword, or solutions can be a double sword solutions. I would like to turn maybe at this point to Vinayak for your thoughts on the awareness issue. Are we sufficiently aware of cybersecurity in India? And if you can comment a bit on whether you see any differences across states, for example, in India, and how can we move toward a whole of government or a whole of society solution?
Yeah. So one important part that we see, right, for example, in the recent past, there was a lot of takeover of the account for social media account, right? So, and there's a basic need of setting up this two-factor authentication for your social media account. So that itself was a big challenge in most of the cases. So, and that tells you how much awareness is required for people to use those platforms securely, configure them securely. So that's one important part. But if you have to see from the effort that overall government plus institutions are making, for example, most of the financial institutions seem taking quite a significant effort in terms of putting significant budget and resources for spreading the awareness for cybersecurity, especially from the fraud prevention perspective. The respective regulators are also investing a lot, and they are pushing the regulated entities to do more for the awareness of that. So that's something that we believe is happening quite aggressively. Secondly, there is an effort at a national level to make sure that some of those means the CERT India, for that matter, has a coverage of almost 95% plus IPs of the country, and they could see the bots that are being impacted all across the country. And I think there I had seen like the experimentations are being made that the tools are being made available to the end user to use those tools to secure themselves, basically. So making these tools available is also one of the important effort that the government is trying to put together, and there are a lot of efforts is going on that part. Some states seems to be doing good, so they invest a lot in terms of One is a spreading awareness, but more importantly, creating good law enforcement ecosystem to give the confidence for people to report the cyber crime. If you see a particular state is leading in terms of reporting cyber crime, that means the state has been quite significantly working towards spreading awareness, and that's what's leading to more reporting of the crime, basically. So, so some of the states like Telangana, Maharashtra, Karnataka, they seems to be doing much better job, and now I'm seeing some of the North Indian states have been trying to take an effort in this particular area. So all effort, and there is also I foresee there is a coordination center for cybercrime. They have been also spreading quite significant effort in this area. They have been also trying to put together a lot of those support system for the victim in terms of putting those portal, putting 1930 is one of the call center number basically where you can call. So some of these efforts being put together by at the state government, at a national level, and at a sector level, some of the industry sectors or some of the industry ecosystem is taking quite a good effort, but how much you do will not be enough in terms of the kind of challenge that we see at the ground level.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Vinay. I would like to turn to you, Narendra. Again, from where you sit, do you think we are aware enough? And on the solution side, if you can comment, in addition to your general view on whether we can have a whole of government or a whole of society approach, if you can comment on the institutional side, the coordination center, for example, I understand is located in the Ministry
of Home Affairs.
Ministry of Home Affairs. So do they have enough skills, enough institution? Do they have among, say, the police or the Home Affairs official, are they sufficiently trained to deal with cybersecurity? So over to you.
Thank you. I'll start off with a couple of examples. I was privy to joining the Global FinFest that was held in Mumbai quite recently, around, I think, 5-6 months back. And I also attended the India Mobile Congress that was held in Delhi. I had a chance to, that Global FinFest in Mumbai was a big event, around 3,000, around 5,000 maybe. People were there, very young, energetic. One thing you felt proud is there's a lot of energy in that room, and there were people coming up with products, different products in the financial sector. But the problem was that when I started talking to them and asked them about the security features of those products, they were looking blank in the sense that they were looking at somebody else to do the security for those products. So that's the level of awareness for the developers in terms of incorporating security as a part of the product. The same in the India Mobile Congress, I had a chance to interact with a lot of these IoT solution providers. The situation was similar there. There's a lot of talk about in the product development area, secure by design. And I've been talking in multiple forums that this is all talk, but nothing actually happening on the ground. So when somebody sits down and then people, starts the development activity, and they'll sit in the room and then list out all the functional requirements of that product that they're going to develop. And security is not treated as a functional requirement. So what happens is the product gets developed, then somebody else comes and starts putting those firewalls and other things that are outside that. So that is not done. So, and from my personal experience, I would tell that if you put security as a functional requirement and then look at all the stakeholders who access that system as adversaries who could compromise the system, then you will find that the software architecture, the hardware architecture, and the system architecture would be entirely different altogether. And that's where the awareness is to start from. And the developers are the most highly educated, trained people in the community. And if the awareness at that level is very low, you can understand the awareness at the different levels of the society. So that's where you have to start from. And the secure by design principles, where are they taught? They're taught at schools. And in the colleges, I think this is one thing that's to be taught, that secure by design is an important component, a functional requirement. And all the developers should actually build that into the products. So when you come to product design, you'll find that, let's say, there have been instances where this OLX is there, where you sell goods and all of that. You do not know whether you're making, and all of these fintech apps which are there, you do not know whether you're making a payment or you're receiving a payment. What's the problem there? It's the problem with the UI design. So I think first thing we start off with is to have this design principles in place to see that how do I make it easy for the customer to not get defrauded? He talked about OTP. Why is the OTP fraud happening? Because the OTP is not only used for this now, some courier comes, he also asks you for an OTP. So that's where the problem is. So there is a problem in the process flow that is there. So I think this is one fundamental problem that has to be addressed. See that regarding the awareness part. And when you talk of security, this is the citizen, there's one part component of the citizen security, where the awareness part is there. First thing, as I said, is the product design should be proper so that, and when you give a product offering, and I'll tell you one thing, this digital service adoption in the country is phenomenal. A lot of people are adopting it. They know how to use the features. So when they are able to adopt digital systems and able to use all the features of that product, why can't the product pitch include security also? It is not part of that. How do I use the product safely is not part of the pitch. So that product pitch itself should have that. And when the person is able to adopt digital technologies and use digital services so easily, I'm talking of people who don't have formal education or low level of formal education who are able to use the services, they will definitely be able to use the services safely and securely if the product pitch also includes the safe use of the technology. And that is where it has to start from. And I think that would make life easy for a lot of people. Okay, that is one part. Then coming to the cybersecurity part, and one thing is the skill sets required for cybersecurity. When India adopted digital technologies, we had two institutions that really came about, NIIT and APTEC. They are not government institutions. They provided training, they provided certification. They were not certifications recognized by the government, but industry adopted the standards, adopted those certifications, and recruited people based on that. Something similar, unfortunately, has not happened in the cybersecurity space. So here, I think that's where some amount of government intervention is required to see that we have some curriculum, some training happening and certification happening in this space, so that we, at the level of people who are manning critical information infrastructure or infrastructure other than critical information infrastructure, also have the capabilities and skill sets that are required. So how do we go about it is one problem that we have. And in this regard, we have recognized that the problem here. One initiative of the Ministry of Electronics and Information Technology, the ISEA program, Information Security Education Awareness. It's gone through 2 iterations, and we have a 3.0 iteration that's recently been approved. Earlier versions, they were looking at, there's an awareness component where school teachers are trained about it, and so that the school children can be taught cybersecurity hygiene practices. There's an element for government officers to be trained. And there is an element for development of curriculum at the graduate and undergraduate and postgraduate level and PhDs. That's one component that is there. The version 3.0 has really expanded itself to have a facility for virtual labs so that people could get hands-on training on cybersecurity principles. Theoretical training doesn't really help for people to practice. So this is one concept that's there. Then we have also created an institution called the Rashtriya Raksha University in Gujarat. It's basically based on national security. And there we have funded a project for creating a national cyber range, which would help in training people on cybersecurity practices, practical training. And sectorally, like for the operational technologies for power sector, for example, they're different. For different sectors, we have different operational technologies. This cyber range would have facilities for, in addition to the IT part of it, the operational training also would be part of that. And we've also conducted national cyber exercise. The second iteration of that was in October last year. And with the national cyber range coming in, we plan that every month we'll have these training programs, and around 3,000 people across all sectors we want to train in 1 year, so that they have the skills that are required for incident management and for operation of these security systems that are there. Then the other part is, I talked about the certification framework we don't have. So there's one institution mechanism called the National Critical Information Infrastructure Protection Center. So we have told them that come up with a certification framework for personnel. So they have reached out to the Quality Council of India. Along with them, both of them, they're coming up with a certification framework for individual, a certification framework for training organizations, and an accredited organization which would actually certify both the certification organization with certified individuals and the training organizations. That's it in advanced stage, and hopefully within a couple of months, before March itself, we will be floating that scheme where then people would have then recognize the different skill sets that are required, roles that are required, and the type of training that will be required for that. Based on that, this is going to come. So this is another area.
Thanks. I think
And
so
coming down to citizen
if
level.
you can conclude in
Yeah,
1
I'm
minute
coming
or
to
less,
that.
that'd be great. Thank you.
Coming to the citizen level, there's an interesting platform that Mr. Vinayak had also mentioned about the I4C, Indian Cybercrime Coordination Center. That has reached a certain level of maturity, but and that is a platform that will be used for the awareness programs for fighting cybercrime with the citizens abroad, and that's another platform that is there.
Great.
So
Great.
there are multiple, initiatives that are happening
Thank
to
you.
increase that, and I would say that's still a work in progress, and
Okay,
much
great.
more is required to be
Great.
done.
Thank you very much, Narendra. This is very helpful. I'll turn to you now, Napina, if we can hear you now with your thought on awareness, level of awareness in India about cybersecurity, and then your thought on whether we're moving toward a whole of government or a whole of society approach, and if we're not, what will it take to have a whole of society approach to it? If you can be super brief, I would appreciate, because I've been given a time check. We only have a few minutes left.
Sure, thank you. But am I audible?
Yes, we can hear you.
Perfect, because I did assume I was audible earlier, and I think some of the inputs I gave was missed out. So this is my extremely brief intervention here. So a lot of the initiatives that have been started in India were already highlighted by Mr. Narendranath and Vinayak. The one element which I would want to strongly emphasize again is the need for effective enforcement. We have a fair number of laws. A lot of amendments to the existing laws have already been brought about. A lot of initiatives have commenced. And as I mentioned earlier, through court interventions, you also have precedent law to come in place to provide for preventive, protective measures and to emphasize the punitive actions. If despite all this, we are seeing an exponential increase in cyber crimes, it merely points to the fact that there is no fear of enforcement. So that aspect needs to come in for law as a deterrence through better enforcement and through better awareness of such enforcement. If a criminal believes that the digital domain provides him some kind of an invisibility cloak, it's important for us to dispel that myth. And that is my only earnest request, that we have better processes for more effective enforcement. Thank you for having me here.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Napina. And I'm sure the work you're doing in the court will help ensure that there is at least some enforcement. Thank you. I would like to turn to the audience for your question. We have, I think, 7 minutes left now. Before turning to you, I wanted to shamelessly put in a plug on the work with the importance of digital at the World Bank. Under the leadership of our new President Ajay Banga, we are organizing our technical fields into what we call 5 verticals. And when you cut the work into 5, you don't expect digital to have one of the verticals, but we do. The 5 verticals are people, prosperity, planet, infrastructure, and digital. This is to show that digital is sufficiently important to deserve its own vertical in the gamut of work we do. So I just wanted to make you aware of that and suggest that if you have thought on how we can, at the World Bank, use digital for the purpose of development, we'll welcome your thought. And the reason why digital is so important for us is because it brings inclusiveness, it brings development. If developing countries are left out of the digital economy, there is no way they can achieve their development goals, and there is no way, if they were to achieve it, there is no way they could achieve it in an inclusive way. So I just wanted to put in this plug. Now, with that, let's use the next 6 minutes or so for your questions. We'll just take one round of questions, and if you want, you can specify which panel member you would like to hear from on your questions, or if it is general, you can also leave it general. Thanks. And if you can briefly say who you are, I would appreciate it.
Hello, sir. I'm Atul, a student from Delhi University. Sir, my question is in public interest, and I would take around 40 seconds. Sir, personal data is believed to be the oil of this era. And there has been many instances in India that the personal data has been breached over the time. For instance, the Aadhaar details leak of around 80 crore people. So my question to Vinayak Godse sir is, how safe and secure a common citizen is in using internet openly, and what are the initiatives the government has taken to address the same?
Thank you
Thank
for
you.
your question. We'll take all the questions at once and we'll come back to you, Vinayak. Any other questions? Okay, yes, please go ahead.
Yeah, Mr. Narendranath, recently there was an alternative to OTP or proposal. So do you think OTP will be replaced by an alternative?
So that's the question for Vinayak, I guess, or maybe for Narendra also, because okay, thanks. Any other question? Yes. Please.
So my name is Surendra Singh. My apologies, but I don't know how to pronounce it, so forgive me for this. But Mr. Kwok, the question is for you.
For me?
To you, sir.
Oh, I'm not allowed to answer questions, but please ask your question. But go ahead, go ahead.
But in that case, I would urge you to direct to whoever you think is the best person.
Okay.
I mean, I live in India, so and I'm working with this institution as well, Pratham Education, as an educational consultant. But my question is, when you apply these digital economy and digital tools in India, I mean, we've had some discussion, but I would love your perspective as well. What are the, let's say, the top 3 or 5 challenges that you face in a country like us, which is planning to be where we want to, but there is a resource gap? So there's a lot of things that we need to do. From your perspective, the work that you've done, what are the challenges that you've seen, and how would you address, I mean, what are the things that we can do to improve them and to be where we want to be till 2047? Thank you.
Okay, great. Okay, great. Thank you. Any other question? So let's come to I will answer that question. At least I'll try. But let's hear from the panel first because they have priority over me. Let's first turn to Vinay.
Yeah, so on the data that is flowing and data that can be used or misused, basically, right? So one is certainly what you want to do to secure that data, but in the case of the personal information, as it has been underlined by Supreme Court as a privacy is a fundamental right for us, and now DPDP Act is coming in. So government would, as DPDP Act, it's not government, it's parliament, is define the obligations and liabilities and requirements for protection of data, basically, right? So one part is the DPDP Act talks about what you need to do. So there is a content for the privacy, data protection has been defined. There are obligations and liabilities also defined, basically. And those are quite significant obligations and liabilities, and that itself will make it sure those organizations which are in the business of collecting personal information using it will behave more responsibly and accountably. That's one part. And secondly, there's something happen for that matter. Until now, you didn't have the right to grievances, right to take a recourse of such kind of use, basically. So going forward, you will be enjoying that right, basically. So creating obligations and liabilities towards the data protection is one of the significant things that the country does to make sure that the data is used sensibly and responsibly, basically.
Thank you, Vinay. On the OTP, anybody would like to come in? Yes.
Yeah, as Mr. Vinayak has also pointed out, there have been, OTP has been used, and because of the lack of understanding about how the OTP is to be used, So whenever such instances happen, there's definitely an examination that happens about, how do I mitigate the vulnerabilities that are in the use of the OTP? That is an exercise that's happening. But whether it's going to be replaced is not a question that you can answer at this moment of time.
Yeah. Can I add to that? Because uh, one part is there are two type of problem here. One is you are making end user as a party to take a security decision because OTP has to be entered by end user. Another part is as end user end up sharing the OTP, sometimes the liability equations written in such a way that you share the OTP, that's why you are responsible basically. And that is why RBI in recent announcement, last week itself, RBI announced that they are certainly going away from OTP authentication and they are setting up some process to investigation methods which are doing away from the OTP. And there are technology which has progressed a lot in terms of removing the need of the end user to pay OTP basically. So there definitely process which has been set up for this.
Thank you. Thank you.
May
So
I
I would,
come in? May I come in on the...
yes, please, Napina.
So very briefly, for the first question that was raised, interestingly, you had a provision under the Information Technology Act to call upon the adjudicating officer to decide on data breaches and the compensation thereunder. If you look at the number of data breaches that had happened whilst that provision was still in place, and what has happened till date, you will realize literally nobody availed of that remedy. As Vinayak pointed out, now you have the DPDP Act coming in, and once the rules are notified, it will become effective. If you look at the DPDP, however, in a way, I would say the provisions, 42A was the data protection, the minimalist data protection law we had. That is literally being replaced by an entire law, but you do not have the kind of remedies the way you would see it under IT Act. But under the DPDP, there is a process by which a prosecution is to be initiated based on, it's like a sanction process. So we'll have to wait and watch how effective that's likely to be. That does not mean your right as an individual or a citizen is taken away in terms of either contesting or questioning a data breach that impacted you. So please do feel free to take your remedies, because if you don't, merely complaining about a breach is not going to get us anything. As far as the OTP aspect is concerned, that is what is called as contributory negligence in law, and therefore you had two different kinds of liabilities which RBI mandated: zero liability where you haven't shared OTP, etc., and limited liability even where you share OTP, you are entitled to certain remedies. The RBI also needs to relook it beyond just OTP in terms of remedies, see the kind of trends in terms of financial frauds. And one thing I've been batting for, and again I earnestly hope would come up soon, is for RBI to evaluate the liability of the payee bank. Because ultimately, every financial fraud-based cybercrime is using banking channels. And therefore, plugging the hole not just in terms of the payer bank, which is where the OTP process comes in, but also from the payee bank is very critical.
Thank you. Payal, you want to add anything?
Yeah, I just want to add to, in terms of fraud, like when we talk about fraud, we need to peg it not to the technical aspect, but to the social aspect. Like, for example, internet romance scams. Why do people get into that position in the first place? So a lot of these technological issues and challenges have a deep social nature, and we need to approach it that way. And I think the bottom line of this is that we should be, I think we need a recalibration of how we look at safety and security. I mean, we should be troubled when, Meta embraces privacy first as the leader of and champion of privacy. That means it's a circumvention of an abdication of responsibility on data management, for instance, right? Or when consent becomes the go-to for, trusted systems, but when you have systems like the guardianship system in Saudi Arabia, where, women have to consent by law to being tracked for many years. I mean, now the system is no longer in place, but then it actually makes a mockery of it. So let us rethink what it means for safety and security in today's day through an auditing mechanism, which is not designed by default at the start or at the end measure, but on an ongoing basis of what does that mean? How do we enforce it? And I very much resonate with what's been said on the panel. Thank
Great.
you.
Great, thanks. Thank you very much. Baya. Let me briefly try to answer the last question. From where I see it, I see the challenge. Well, first, before talking about the challenges, let's remember that in terms of digital development, India is ahead of the curve compared to most developing countries, and even compared to some developed countries. India stack, the innovations that are happening in places such as Bangalore and elsewhere, and even in Delhi and Gurgaon, these places are like first world places when it comes to digital and technology. Having said that, because you asked, I would say I see three challenges. One is on the infrastructure side. On the infrastructure side, you will actually, with everything we hear about India stack, you will not think that infrastructure is a challenge, but digital infrastructure and IT infrastructure is a challenge. When we look at the data, India is not where it should be. India has infrastructure for simple communications, for mobile calls, for example, and sufficiently so. But when it comes to high-speed internet, on average, many emerging market economies have more capability than what you see here in India. So that's why, for example, sometimes you'll notice your internet is slow. You can't reach places where you want to reach, and it's normal also because the large country is very large. So the infrastructure needs are big, but it is a challenge, and it's an area of growth. Actually, if you want to put it positively, it's an area where if India were to reach where it will want to be, it will be a game changer. And the second challenge is what we talked about here today. It's cybersecurity. So I will not elaborate on that. And again, because India is big and India is very diverse, it makes cybersecurity quite challenging. And the third challenge is, again, this is also an opportunity. It is the mainstreaming. India is really, as I said, ahead of the curve in digital, but it has not been mainstreamed to the extent that you will expect. It's like it's happening in parts of India and it's not happening in some other parts of India. We heard about differences across states. So first, mainstreaming in all states, and some states are not there yet. Second, mainstreaming in how business is done in the private sector. You'll see a lot of digital. We see a lot of digital progress or expertise or usage in the services sector, and perhaps not enough in the manufacturing and industry sector. So industry and manufacturing can become a lot more efficient if they were to embrace digital as much as the services sector has embraced it. And third level of mainstreaming is also how the public sector is run. I think we will all agree that if you want to, if you're dealing with the public sector, whether it's in a state that is advanced or in a state that is not so advanced, you still will feel, well, they could use a little bit of technology to make things more agile and faster. So maybe there is a cultural change that is needed there, or maybe if they embrace technology to run services and business in the public sector, it will expose risks, services to the risk. I don't know, but what we see is that in countries like Lithuania and other countries, they've used technology really to make public sector a lot more agile than in some states in India. So I would say mainstreaming it across state, public sector, and private sector is an opportunity. Let me pause here, and I think we've run out of time, but I would like to invite all of you to give a big hand to our panel. They've been really, really excellent.
Thank you, August, and thank you, panelists. Just hold on for a minute. Ms. Napina, if you can be online and they can take a picture with you online, if that's fine.
So in the, make sure that you can be seen. Can you see her?
Yeah.
Yes. That, this way? I think, yes. Okay, okay. Thank you.
So before all of you leave, just allow me 2 minutes to thank everyone who made this possible. And the list is very long, and I apologize in advance if I miss out anybody, but I do mean to thank a lot of people who helped put this together. And let me start with Prosus. No one from Prosus is here at the moment, but I'm sure they'll hear the recording at some point and they'll know that we're very grateful for their funding. To allow us to do this, to allow us the flexibility to develop a report that does take a lot of time and effort. And in addition to not just the funding, but they've made the resources available. The team is always there helping us, guiding us. Second, and most importantly, are our advisory panel members. So thank you so much. Many of them are still sitting here. They've been with us since yesterday. And even before that, remotely telling us about the report and while it was developing. And to all the panelists, so the advisory panel was a part of the panel, and then all the other panelists who joined us today, thank you so much. Some of them were not from Delhi, but they took the effort to come and join us here. To the audience, for staying back the whole day. I don't think in any conference we've had the hall so full in the last session. And thank you for engaging. Thank you for being here the whole day. Finally, to our team at ICRIER, I think let me start first with the admin team. So all the good food, all the arrangements, the report, the quality, it's all them. Like it, I don't think anything would have been possible. Let me specifically take names: Neha, Rajesh ji, Riya, Rajkumar, just wouldn't have been possible. And many others you don't see, Gigi, Ashok ji. It's not possible to do this without them. And finally is the Desi team, the digital economy team. I don't know, has August left? We also have 5 pillars. I don't know if I think he's left. He's probably not listening. But so of the 5 research pillars, the digital economy startup and innovation team that's sitting right there and helped put together this report. So thank you so much for staying up, and get good sleep for 2 days. Enjoy the weekend. And thank you, everyone. Thank you so much.